upfront conclusion about the iPhone 14 Pro is that it's the kind of phone that you need to use for long enough time to appreciate all the small but significant things that it does. It represents a promise of a new direction for Apple that I think is very exciting, and if you own an iPhone 11 or older, I think you'd be thrilled with this purchase. We're going to talk about the positives and negatives of the new dynamic island, the always-on display and just the new display in general, and the new camera system on the back. I'm going to be doing a full camera comparison between the 14 Pro, 13 Pro, and an iPhone XR for the majority of you who might actually own an older iPhone, so you can see just how far the camera has come over the years. And I think you'll be surprised by a lot of the things that I discovered. Let's start with the new dynamic island. It's a fun, interactive bubble that consolidates all of your notifications, alerts, and current activities on your iPhone. If I want to play a song on Spotify, then swipe out of the app, it will pop right into the island. You can start a timer, swipe out, and it will create a second bubble of controls for that timer in the island. If you want to interact with either activity, you want to just hold down on the respective icon and it will show you a new set of controls that you'll get access to. And as you can see, the animations of an app jumping into the island, you long pressing to get access to controls, or even simply tapping on the island when nothing is there, it's all well done. It feels alive and fluid, and most importantly, it's just plain fun to use. The island also animates when you charge your phone. If you turn on or off your silent switch, it shows you the time duration of an AirDrop. It can show you voice memos, screen recordings, ongoing calls, or even if someone is actively using your cellular hotspot on your iPhone. I was using my iPhone on Spotify, just picking a song, and then I swiped up, just thinking, oh, okay, I want to look at this thing going to the island again. And then I realized nothing went into the island because I wasn't using my 14 Pro. I was actually using my iPhone 13 Pro mistakenly. This experience showed me that the dynamic island is hidden and out of sight to your eyes when it isn't needed, but comes alive within your line of vision when required. And that's about where it ends for the positives of the dynamic island. I wish I could say it's perfect, but it's not. It's actually not good at times. Today, if you want access to more controls, you must hold down on the island and then it pops up. And a single tap brings you right back to the app. It just feels backwards to me. A single tap should open up controls and a long tap should bring up the full app. And finally, some people may find the dynamic island too out of reach with one hand. I don't have small hands by any means and I can reach with my thumb on my iPhone 14 Pro, but it's still not the most comfortable experience, and sometimes I have to opt to use my second hand. If I owned an iPhone 14 Pro Max, that would seem like a challenging experience to do with one hand, so something to consider. Now let's talk about the always-on display. It's something that has been on Android phones for years, and Apple waited a long time to get this feature right before releasing it to its users, and I personally think that they nailed it. I love it, but a lot of people would disagree with me. I'm going to talk about both sides, so let's break it down. As it stands today, the always-on display is on, literally, more so than any other phone on the market today. You can see the clock, along with the reduced color tones of wallpapers, and even people's skin tones. The argument here is that people find it too bright and distracting. It makes the phone seem like there are notifications when there aren't. Or if you want to be focused on your work with your phone resting on the table, some people just can't get past how bright it is in their peripheral vision. I can see where people are coming from here. The display is quite bright for an always-on display, but for my personal experience, I don't find it annoying. I don't find it distracting at all. If I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. And the reality is that the iPhone 14 Pro's display with the always-on feature is at like a 30 or 20% brightness if I'm going to attach a number to it. It's not 100%. So my brain is not going to think my phone is on because there is a visible difference between the always-on display and the fully on display. I hope that made sense. And can we just talk about the fact that we can see our wallpaper in all of its glory in its dimmed state? It gives your iPhone an aesthetic look when it's on idle that no other phone is doing right now. And I would bet money that this type of always-on display is going to make its way to Android phones. 100%. Regardless of how I feel, I do think Apple wasn't being very accommodating here to this change. They should give users more control about how they want to tune their display. A lot of people would like to still have this always-on display, but to have it not show my wallpaper and just show the clock and the date, because that is less distracting to people, and that's a valid feeling and a valid point. So hopefully in a future iOS 16 update that they fix that. I hope. Another big complaint worth exploring here is how this always-on display can impact your battery life. After all, the display is showing some color here. It is on to some capacity all the time, albeit it is at a 1 Hz refresh rate and not at 120 Hz, so that should balance it out, right? Not really. I mean, from my experience, the iPhone 14 Pro does feel like it has slightly less battery life, but not to the point where I'd want to turn off this feature completely like some other people. I'm still getting around 6 to 7 hours of screen on time, and this thing will last an entire day. And a lot of this is actually possible because of the tiny things that Apple is doing here. If you own an Apple Watch or walk far away enough from the iPhone, it will know that you're not there, and it will actually turn off the display entirely for you. If you put the phone in your pocket or face down, the display will completely turn off. If you attach your phone to CarPlay, the display will completely turn off as well. It's not going to show you your beautiful iOS 16 lock screen. It's going to make you focus on the road the way that it should be. So good job, Apple, there. And also at night, from my experience, the ambient light sensors can detect just how bright or dark it is in your room. So when you put this iPhone on your bedside table and it's pitch black in there, the display will actually get even darker than normal from my experience. Some people find this still to be too bright to sleep with, and the solution is just to put your phone into sleep mode and it will turn off completely. And finally, if you do go into low power mode, your iPhone will turn off this feature altogether. That is proof in the pudding that this impacts battery life to some degree. Okay, it's camera time. In this section of the video, we're going to be doing an in-depth comparison between the iPhone 14 Pro camera, the 13 Pro, and an older iPhone XR for the majority of you who probably have an older iPhone and are considering upgrading, because I want to show you how far the cameras have come over the years. And I think you'll be very excited and surprised by some of my discoveries. The new iPhone 14 Pro comes with a new set of cameras that promises 2 to 3 better low light image performance across all lenses, and the primary camera is packed with a new 48 megapixel sensor that is supposed to give us more usable details in our images. This all sounds great, so let's see if it's true. Here is a test photo at a beach between all 3 iPhones. When you look at them straight on, they look almost identical unless you actually start to pay attention, because the magic happens when you zoom in. If we focus on this bike first, the iPhone 13 Pro and XR give a more blurred, grainy look. In contrast, the 14 Pro gives off a softer look that preserves a lot more detail, similar to a professional camera. If we zoom in even further to an isolated red tube over there, you can see the XR and 13 Pro break down and turn into a pixelated mess. The 14 Pro still gives off a more detailed, softer image that isn't completely out of whack. The same results are valid if we zoom into the same tree branch. The 14 Pro's 48 megapixel sensor gives us a more usable image more consistently all the time when we zoom in. Now I want to test the new 2x telephoto lens focal length that they added to the 14 Pro. It's a new option that uses the middle 12 megapixels of the large 48 megapixel sensor to still give you a usable, high quality photo without having to digitally zoom into your subject. I tested this by digitally zooming in 2x on the primary camera on my 13 Pro and compared it to the 2x non-digital telephoto zoom of the 14 Pro. At first glance, the 14 Pro image does look sharper. If we zoom into the Deloitte sign there, you can make out more of the letters on the 14 Pro's image versus the 13 Pro. You can clearly see the E, L, and O on the 14 Pro image, and if we zoom into the condo building, the 14 Pro's 2x zoom has a cast of light that just makes the overall building pop more and look ever so slightly sharper than the 13 Pro. And finally, the 13 Pro's image is cooler than the 14 Pro's image. The 14 Pro actually likes to opt for a warmer look this time around. And you'll notice this warmer temperature theme a lot in this comparison. As for the selfie camera, it is harder to see the difference at a first glance, but if you keep looking, the 14 Pro chooses a warmer picture, whereas the 13 Pro keeps opting for that cooler photo. In terms of detail, I'm having trouble seeing a difference here. Still, I will say the 14 Pro selfie looks more pleasing. The way the light is handled on my face is better, and if you look hard enough, there is the slightest difference in detail, but I'm just not sure if the average person really cares about that. But what I will say though is that there is a big difference in low light performance on the selfie camera especially, and we'll get to that very soon in this video. But first, let's do an ultra wide low light camera test, because Apple is promising up to 3 times better performance here in low light. So let's break it down. Here is a photo between the 13 Pro Pro and the 14 Pro's ultra wide. You can clearly see the ultra wide camera on the 14 Pro is separating itself here. The overall amount of light being captured and the general sharpness of the 14 Pro is very noticeable here. The concrete has much more detail when you zoom in, and also when you zoom into the people on the bench at the back, both photos are blurry, but the 14 Pro's ultra wide still allows you to vaguely see the legs cross of the gentleman and some aspects of the hand. Here's another comparison. You can see how much detail the 14 Pro is holding on the condo building and in the grass without zooming in at all compared to the 13 Pro. If we zoom into the grass, the difference is even more apparent. The grass on the 13 Pro looks like beads of pixels, whereas the 14 Pro can clearly see more of the individual strains of grass. When we zoom into the condo building, the 13 Pro looks blurrier in every aspect compared to the 14 Pro. The difference is less noticeable when we zoom into the condo building on the far left. There is slightly more noise there on the 13 Pro, but it's not as obvious here. Now here's a low light comparison of the same lake path, but with the primary lens of the 13 Pro versus the 48 megapixel lens of the 14 Pro. Every aspect of the 14 Pro picture is better. It captures more light on all parts of the frame. The concrete is more detailed and focused than the 13 Pro. When we zoom into the tree leaves, we can see how much more of the leaves are lit up and preserve more detail. If we zoom into the furthest pot of flowers, the 13 Pro looks quite blurry, where you start to lose any sense of what's there. The 14 Pro can show you differences in colors and shapes and has accurate detail to get a decent idea of what you're looking at from a distance. Look at this sign here as well. Both pictures are a blurred mess, but on the 14 Pro, you can see separate lines of text and more general detail, whereas on the 13 Pro, you can't make out much of anything there. Here's the same test now, but on the telephoto lens of both phones. The most obvious difference here is just going to be the choice of tone. The telephoto lens on the 13 Pro went for a cooler look, and the 14 Pro went for a warmer look. The 14 Pro is a more realistic image. That was the way that it looked to me with my own eyes, whereas the 13 Pro lighting did not look like that at all in real life. If we zoom into the concrete, I'm having trouble seeing any significant difference in detail. They look almost the same. The same is true if we zoom into a pot of grass. They look virtually the same. I tried again by photographing a condo far away. These photos look the same as well. I think it's safe to say that unfortunately the telephoto lens here didn't really get the big update that we're seeing on the ultra wide and on the main camera so far. And now to my favorite test, or my second favorite. This one is going to be the selfie low light test, but there's a really cool adaptive flash test just coming up a little bit further in this video. For the selfie camera, I used really harsh low light conditions, and the 14 Pro did create a more usable image of my face. The 13 Pro darkens a lot of the aspects of my face, while the 14 Pro did a better job preserving some of my skin tones. It's not the most significant difference here, but I think this difference is still meaningful and worth showing. But the biggest difference is if we take a look at a picture in my bathroom with all the lights turned off and using the flash on the front-facing screen. This is the definitive difference Apple was promising. Its new photonic engine is doing much more work to keep details on my face in the darkest environments. If you look at the 13 Pro image, my face is noticeably more blurry. I think it's safe to say that the 14 Pro's selfie camera is an excellent step up, especially at night. Okay, so now to my favorite part of the camera system, and something that most average people just wouldn't even know it's there unless you told them, and that's the new adaptive flash on the 14 Pro cameras. It essentially has 9 new LEDs that can adjust the pattern and intensity depending on the focal length and type of picture that you're taking. The overall result is that when you have subjects in flash, they're gonna look a lot better than they did on any other iPhone, and you're gonna see why. I took an ultra-wide picture in the dark in my condo on both phones, and you can see a stark difference here. The 14 Pro image is noticeably sharper thanks to the improved ultra-wide lens and the new photonic engine, but more importantly, the type of flash used was different. The 13 Pro rendered a warmer, inaccurate image almost with a slight green tint to it, whereas the 14 Pro resembles my white walls perfectly and used the new adaptive flash to feature my face in a way that looks better. Apple also introduced a new action mode on the camera system that gives you more stabilized footage when you're doing lots of movement with your iPhone. Think of GoPro or Insta360. Apple is basically giving you the feature of those cameras built into the phone. Looking at an older iPhone XR, we can see the stabilization is okay while I'm running, but it's not not the best. We're getting quite a shaky effect here. When we look at the 13 Pro, the stabilization has improved over the years, as you can tell, and the footage is far more usable. But once we jump to the 14 Pro, we can see the subtle but meaningful difference in its ability to stabilize shaky footage. iPhone stabilization was already quite good, but the action mode does take it a step further for anyone who wants even more stable footage from their device. Okay, just a quick note about safety features. The new iPhone 14 Pro can send text messages in the event of an emergency via satellite and detect when you have been in a car accident. I've mentioned this in my initial review, but I'm going to repeat it again. There's no other phone right now that protects your life more than the new iPhone 14 lineup. This may be a feature that you never use, but if you're in a situation where you had to, you're going to be so thankful you had an iPhone with you that day. And that's just something you can't say with Android or any other phone on this planet right now. Overall, I'm very happy with the iPhone 14 Pro. Apple set the stage for a new direction for the iPhone that puts your health first, and they found ways to improve on a formula that seemingly feels impossible to do every single year. Like, how much better can iPhones get? And Apple found a way here that I think is meaningful. Except, they could have added USB-C. We still have Lightning. That's always gonna be a complaint by me every single year. So please, in the iPhone 15, let's just cut the charades, give us USB-C, and the whole world will be happy. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll leave a video right here for you to check out my initial impressions of the 14 Pro when I got out of the box. But anyways, subscribe, drop a like, and comment hashtag 14 Pro if you finish the video. And I'll catch all of you guys in the next one. Peace.